Senator Johnson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, you asked why is the Federal Records Act not being followed? I think it's pretty simple. Administrations can ignore it with impunity. And why is that? Because Congress has allowed its oversight role to completely atrophy. This committee has allowed its oversight and investigatory capability to atrophy. That's the problem. So you can pass more laws, but until Congress steps up the plate and we accept our responsibility for doing this. I'll use an example. In June of 2021, because of FOIA requests, even though I'm sure other committees of Congress had been asking for these records, Anthony Fauci, or HHS, finally released Anthony Fauci's emails, about 4,000 pages. Within a week, Senator Paul, I think, joined me and 3 other members of this committee and requested those documents unredacted. Again, FOIA is subject to redactions. There, what is it, 7 different exemptions or 9, whatever. By the way, you never know whether those redactions are legitimate. We find repeatedly that they're illegitimate. They're not justified redactions, right? So going through the accommodation process, we asked for all 4,000. We got all 4,000 redacted. Again, Congress is not subject to those redactions. So through an accommodation process, we asked, okay, we want to focus on these 400 pages. We want to see them unredacted, or we want to get them. Well, they didn't give them to us. We could go down to a reading room, not make copies, but take notes. So we were able to review 350 of the 400 pages unredacted. That took a couple months. Now, since June of 2021, there are 50 pages of the Fauci emails. Okay, by the way, one of the exemptions they use frequently here is interagency, even though these emails are outside the agency. So again, completely fraudulent exemptions are being claimed. But I've asked the chairman to subpoena these records. I've asked the chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee investigation to assist me, use his influence with this administration to get Secretary Becerra to give us these records. We had Secretary Becerra before the Senate Finance Committee a year ago. I did the same thing. I showed him these last 50 pages. And by the way, the law that governs when 5 members of this committee ask for something, it's like a subpoena. The agency shall turn the information over to us. He hasn't. I asked him last week, why haven't you turned these over? They haven't even produced a privilege log telling us why to justify these redactions. So again, the problem here is we are not insisting that the administration honor our constitutional responsibility and authority to conduct oversight and obtain these records on behalf of the American public. That's the problem. Senator Paul, I appreciate, and Mr. Ruskin, I appreciate you talking about the Dr. Morin's email. We did not, by the way, get that email unredacted from NIH. That came through our investigation in the minority here. Senator Paul and I joined in this request. I'm not going to tell you from who because we want active investigation. And you start disclosing that, you start ruining your investigation. But we obtained that email in a document dump of 175,000 pages. Now, my staff was able to pull that email out of that haystack. And of course, we've written to Secretary Becerra. Explain this. Give us more documents. We've, of course, gotten no response from Secretary Becerra. We've gotten no help from the majority of this committee in uncovering this. So again, we can be talking about more laws, but part of the problem, I used to chair this committee. When I took over the chair, the Permanent Subcommittee investigation, the majority got $1 million budget. When Senator Peters took over the committee, his budget was increased 15%, and he cut the budget of the Permanent Subcommittee investigation by about 26%. It hasn't been restored. We're still down about 16% of what it was. Now, we got how many million people in the federal government? Millions, right? You know how many staff members the premier investigatory body of the United States Senate has? We've got 5. So again, you ask, why is the Federal Records Act followed? Because Congress is not interested in doing investigations or oversight, certainly not the Senate. If it were, we would have a dramatically increased budget for the permanent subcommittee investigation. We would have the majority in what I would consider a completely nonpartisan investigation, trying to figure out where did this pandemic start. We'd be working on this in a bipartisan fashion. We would have already subpoenaed years ago all of the Fauci emails, rather than remain silent and not allow or not have the majority join the minority in trying to get this information. So again, from my standpoint, I think this is pretty clear. Mr. Ruskin, I do have a question for you. I want you to speak to the difference between FOIA and redactions versus congressional oversight, which really the only legitimate purpose for withholding things would be executive privilege, which is quite limited, right? Executive privilege only applies to communications with the president, not interagency stuff. So I mean, agency heads talking to each other, that's not executive privilege. It has to involve the president. Is that correct, Mr. Ruskin?
That's a correct description.
Microphone?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Do you agree with my basic assessment here that the reason the administrations are getting away with this is they just learned over the decades as Congress has allowed its oversight ability to completely atrophy, that there's no penalty? There's none.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with your basic assessment that in general, over the last, say, 55 years or so, Congress's oversight of the federal government has declined, and that's really tragic. In addition, citizens' ability to do oversight of the federal government through the FOIA has been dramatically circumscribed just after the FOIA came into being, and that has continued on and continued to get worse. And so it's two problems together. As well, we have a dramatic lack of investigative reporters.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you're serious about this, subpoena these last 50 pages. Get on the phone with Secretary Becerra today and go, why don't we have these last 50 pages unredacted? And my guess is the reason we don't is as incriminating as the redacted emails were, there's some probably pretty juicy stuff under all those redactions. So again, join us, subpoena. Use the power of this committee. Use our constitutional authority, demand that the administration turn over these records. Thank you.